Welcome back, everybody. It's Zach here, bringing you guys another fantasy football video. Hope you guys had a good Memorial Day weekend. Sorry for the delay between videos. Was just sort of spending time with family and enjoying the long weekend, so it took an extra day or two off here. But excited to get back to it. And this one, I'm going to be going over what I think are the best draft picks in every single round. So I just went through the first 8 rounds. I'm referring to PPR formats according to Fantasy Pros ADP. So if you want to understand what ADP list I'm pulling from, just go on Fantasy Pros, filter to PPR, and you'll see the list of players I'm basing this off of. Obviously, the ADPs are going to vary quite a bit on platform from platform to platform, whether or not you're on Underdog or on Sleeper or wherever else we're looking at it. But Fantasy Pros does a good job sort of just coming up with a composite ADP, so it should be pretty good. Obviously, it's going to vary from site to site, and we'll see as the offseason progresses, but it's just sort of a fun exercise to see where we're at here. Went through the first 8 rounds just to make sure that I could sort of cover players at each and every position, and didn't want to go too long and just sort of bore you guys with players that weren't going to be super interesting. We can get into sleepers and all that stuff later on as well. But it was a lot of fun. The next video will be a worst draft pick in every single round video as well. It'll be the same format. I'll just go over players that I think aren't worth drafting and what are just like overall the worst values in each round. So should be a lot of fun. And yeah, just excited to get through it. And if you guys have any comments or anything, just let me know. It's going to be a good one, I think. So yeah, let's get into round one here. So starting things off with round one, I honestly think the best value or best draft pick in round one is going to be Brees Hall. He obviously had finished as the running back 2 last season, and he was honestly on one of, if not the worst offenses in the NFL, depending upon what metrics you want to look at. The Jets were one of, if not the worst offense in the NFL last season. And if you watched them play, I think you already knew that. You didn't need to see the numbers to know that that's true. And he did all of this coming off of a torn ACL, which I think is something we're really forgetting. That's an extremely impressive accomplishment for a player coming off of that significant of an injury. We have a ton of history and historical data showing that running backs coming off of torn ACLs are significantly better in year 2 off of that ACL. I think it's honestly impressive to think about that and know that Brees Hall is going to be better this year, at least from a talent standpoint, than he was last season. He's still super young. He's going to be even more explosive, and that's just going to be fantastic. And on top of that, we saw last season early on in the year, they sort of involved Dalvin Cook way too much in the offense. We saw Brees Hall truly take over and have a workhorse role towards the end of the season. I think we're going to see even more of that this season. And on top of that, we expect the Jets to improve significantly on offense. Obviously, Aaron Rodgers is returning from his Achilles injury. I don't know how good Aaron Rodgers is going to be, but it's just really safe to say they're going to be a hell of a lot better than they were last season. Even if Rodgers goes down, they've got Tyrod Taylor as a backup. They drafted another rookie as well. They're going to have better quarterback play this season than they had last season, even if Rodgers is just absolutely atrocious. And on top of that, they drafted some offensive linemen, brought in some help there. I think it's very reasonable to assume here that Brees Hall and the Jets offense is just going to be even better than what it was last season. And on top of that, Brees Hall, who's currently being drafted as the RB3, he's my RB2 in my rankings. He ends up going at pick 8 right now, and just historically speaking, if you think back to a normal year in a fantasy draft, the second running back or third running back in fantasy and consensus rankings, they're going to be a top 3 pick. Maybe normally we have one receiver go in the top 5 picks, but it's generally really running back heavy early on, and we're seeing sort of a flip here and a bit of a role reversal where we're seeing a lot of wide receivers go. At the top of the draft, you have obviously Christian McCaffrey going 1 overall, but the next 5 picks by ADP right now are currently wide receivers. So it just relieves a lot of value for the running back position later on. So that's why I think Brees Hall at the pick number 8 is just extremely valuable. He's going to be a rock solid pick, and honestly, picking from the 8 spot sounds really nice right now. Up next in round 2, I think Saquon Barkley is actually going to be the best pick here in round 2, and I think this is going to be a trend that we're going to notice here at the start of this video, is that I think the best values early on in the first several rounds are actually going to come at the running back position, and that's just because, like I mentioned, we're super wide receiver heavy at the early part of the draft. Normally, like I said, you'll see 8 running backs go in the first round of the draft, and right now you're seeing guys, it's more closer to 8 wide receivers right now. So right now, Saquon Barkley's got the consensus ADP of the running back 5, but he's still going at pick 15. He's got a legitimate shot to finish as the top 3 running back this season. Obviously, going from New York to Philadelphia is going to give him a lot more scoring opportunities. They gave him a huge contract. We know he's going to be a workhorse running back in this offense, and you could legitimately draft from the 8 spot, like I was mentioning earlier, and you could start the draft with Brees Hall and Saquon Barkley. Picking that late in the draft, that is absolutely insane. That would be a rock solid start, and you'd be really set up for success going forward. So that's sort of where I'm leaning right now. I think it's going to make a lot of sense to draft running backs early, and maybe it's not Saquon. Maybe you want to take JT 1 pick, who's going 1 pick after, but Saquon Barkley is just way too good of a player, and he's being drafted one pick after Drake London. He's going just a couple picks ahead of guys like Devontae Adams and Brandon Ayuk, and that value just doesn't add up to me right now. It doesn't make sense to reach for all these wide receivers when there are just so many stud running backs on the board, and I think you can just save yourself the headache and just be super happy that you're getting a running back one in round two. Moving on to round three, we're going to be tripling down here with another running back. We're going to go with Derrick Henry as the best draft pick in round three. He's currently being drafted 36th overall in PPR formats, making him the last pick in round three, which is just absolutely insane. Obviously, it's safe to say that Derrick Henry is not what he used to be. He's not the best running back in the NFL like he maybe once was just a couple of years ago, but he's still a much better running back than Gus Edwards, especially near the goal line. That didn't fall for him last year as well. And really, it's tough to say really how bad Derrick Henry was last season. He was still a good running back. All the metrics stack up positively. It was just that the offense outside of him couldn't do really anything. So the whole offensive game plan was just to give Derrick Henry a ton of carries and then hope that he complete a deep pass or two to DeAndre Hopkins. So the offense in Baltimore is going to be way better here. Gus Edwards scored 13 touchdowns last season, and we know Derrick Henry's a much better player. And I think that's just obviously giving Derrick Henry an insane amount of upside. On top of that, Keaton Mitchell is coming off of a torn ACL as well. He's probably not going to factor into their plans this season. They've said he's probably not going to take part in off-season training camp. Probably going to be somebody that comes back mid-season. We're not going to project a very large workload, if any, for Keaton Mitchell this season. So it is Derrick Henry's backfield. This is going to be a team that, normally a lot of people think about rushing quarterbacks and think that they're going to steal rushing touchdowns from the running backs, but that's really just not the case with the Ravens as well. Lamar Jackson just doesn't really get in the end zone all that much on the on the ground. Obviously, he's capable of it. He'll probably have 3 to 7 rushing touchdowns this season, but he's not a guy like Josh Allen or Jalen Hurts where he's getting quarterback sneaked in. He's not a guy that's going to run over people at the goal line either. So Derrick Henry, when they get to the goal line, is going to be the guy they give the ball to, and he's got a legitimate shot to score 20 touchdowns this season. And the fact of the matter is, if you told me that Derrick Henry is going to finish this season as a top 3 running back, I think it could happen. He's on a really good offense. He's going to be given an elite role in that offense, and he's still just a really good player. So being able to get him at the end of round 3, that's just way too nice. If you really wanted to start your draft, like I said earlier, you could go Breece Hall, Saquon Barkley, Derrick Henry, and just punt running back the whole rest of the draft. I wouldn't have any problem doing that. I think it's obviously a high T approach. You're going to have a lot of running backs on the roster, and I won't necessarily recommend doing that. But I think the value is just way too crazy there. I would want to see a value at a wide receiver position before I actually just reach for one here. Up next in round 4, we've got one more running back, and I promise you ahead of time that round 5 best value is not going to be a running back, so bear with me here. But in round 4, I honestly think the best pick is going to be James Cook. And I'm not saying here that you should take a running back with each of your first 4 picks, but what I'm really highlighting here is that the value of all these running backs at the top of the draft is just way too good. I have James Cook currently in my top 5 at the running back position. He's a guy that I think is extremely talented. He's going to be given an extremely valuable role in this high octane, powerful offense in Buffalo that honestly, we saw a ton of their weapons leave. We saw them lose Stephon Diggs, Gabe Davis, and Trent Sherfield, obviously a lesser name there, but they're vacating over 250 targets this season. That is insane volume just to be distributed among the new guys. And obviously, they added Keon Coleman, they added Curtis Samuel. We're expecting Khalil Shakir to get more involved. We're expecting Dalton Kincaid to get more involved as well. But historically speaking, there's a lot of data that suggests vacated targets in an offense tend to go towards the running backs and tight ends. I'm not saying James Cook is suddenly going to see a 25% target share or any of that, but James Cook is going to be extremely involved in PPR formats as a guy that's going to be used out of the backfield as a pass catcher. They also lost Latavius Murray this offseason. They did draft a running back in like the 4th or 5th round here that could potentially steal goal line work, but it's just opens up the possibility here for James Cook of him potentially getting that goal line role, because we know that rookies, especially, they're guys that can come in and just not be trustworthy by a high quality team. We saw that last season with the Jacksonville Jaguars. A lot of people were really worried that Tank Bixby was going to come in and steal Travis Etienne's work at the goal line, and he just wasn't ready for it. He wasn't a good enough player, and they couldn't trust him with that role. So we saw Etienne just absolutely explode. That could certainly happen for James Cook here, and I honestly wouldn't be upset if James Cook ended up being my running back 1 if you wanted to go wide receiver early the first 3 rounds. That's not what I'm recommending, obviously, but I think James Cook is a really solid running back to have on your roster, and being able to get a guy that I view as a running back 1 at the 47th pick overall is just way too good of a value. You could take Christian McCaffrey with your first overall pick, go wide receiver at the 2-3 turn, and then take James Cook in round 4, and I think you'd be just super set early on in your draft. So I think it makes a lot of sense here. I think James Cook's going to be a monster this season, and getting him around 4 is just way too good of a value. Up next, we finally got a receiver we're going to talk about here in round 5, and I think the best pick to make in round 5 is actually going to be Jayden Reed. And Jayden Reed just proved last season that he can be a very high-end player in the NFL. We've seen him put up really high-end touchdown production as well. He's a guy that, with his size and profile, it's not something you'd necessarily expect, but I honestly expect him to just take another step forward here in his second season, and we didn't really see him get going quite really up to full speed until week 8 last season. On top of that, Jordan Love, effectively in his rookie season last season as well, I think it's reasonable to assume that this Packers offense is only going to take another step forward. And on top of that, Jayden Reed receives a ton of manufactured touches. He's basically like a little mini Deebo Samuel out there, a guy they're going to give a ton of end arounds to. They're going to manufacture short yardage passes to, and he's just going to be a guy that's going to be extremely safe for you, especially in PPR formats where he's going to get 4 to 5 targets a game every single week, just like as wide receiver screens. He's going to give you a super safe floor, and he's obviously got legitimate wide receiver 1 upside. He was the wide receiver 8 from week 8 onward last season. That's an 11-week sample size. That's clearly something that we can look at and say he could do this over the course of the whole season. And on top of that, even if you take out or just take the whole season, his rookie season, I might add, he finished as the wide receiver 25, and he's being drafted right now as the wide receiver 35, which is just far too low. I understand that Christian Watson was banged up last season. I know a lot of people are expecting Christian Watson to come in and take a little bit of a higher target share, make this more of an even wide receiver core, but Jayden Reed's just too good of a player. He's not someone that I'd be scared at all to take in round 5, and if he ends up as your wide receiver 1, it's obviously not ideal, but he's got a super safe floor, and he's shown that he can put up that high-end production as well. So I love drafting him here in round 5. I think it's a great thing to do, and he's going to be a really solid player for us this season. Up next in round 6, we've got another receiver to talk about. He's someone I've talked about already this season, and that's going to be Diontae Johnson. He's just simply being drafted far too low. He's being drafted after guys like Hollywood Brown, after Brian Thomas. He's going just 1 pick ahead of Chris Godwin. He's being drafted as the wide receiver 39 right now, and Diontae Johnson hasn't finished lower than wide receiver 39 since his rookie season, and he's just 3 seasons removed from finishing as the wide receiver 8 in 2021, so we know he's got legitimate top 10 upside at the wide receiver position, and if you recall that season, it's not like the Steelers were a powerhouse offense in 2021 either. He's just a really good player, an elite wide receiver. He's elite at getting open. He can be used down the field and close to the line of scrimmage, and he's someone that's going to see legitimately upwards of a 30% target share. There just isn't target competition for him elsewhere in Carolina. Obviously, they've got Adam Thielen still, but we saw him trail off at the back half of the last season. He's nowhere near what he used to be. They've got Jonathan Mingo, who's a bust. They've got Xavier Legette, who to me just profiles to be exactly like what Jonathan Mingo was. He's not someone that I'm expecting to see a lot of production out of, and we saw that this offense, as bad as it was, can support high-end production for a wide receiver. Adam Thielen was a wide receiver 1 for the first half of last season, and Diontae Johnson is just simply a far better player. On top of that, Dave Canales, the new offensive coordinator here in Carolina, we've seen him over the last several years really elevate the offenses that he's had control of, from Seattle to Tampa Bay. Over the last 2 seasons, we've seen them get a lot of production out of quarterbacks that haven't necessarily performed at a high level. So I think there's a really safe floor here for Diontae, who's just going to get absolutely peppered with targets, and I think he could even squeak out 5, 6 receiving touchdowns as well this season just by seeing so much volume and what should be at least a slightly better offense than what it was the last season. So I'm not saying Diontae Johnson's going to finish as a wide receiver 1 this season, but if it happened, I wouldn't be necessarily shocked, and he's got a ridiculously high floor as someone that's just going to be peppered with targets, especially in PPR formats. I'd love to have him as my wide receiver 2, and getting him in round 6 is just a really great value here. Next up in round 7, I'm actually not picking a specific player here just because it was too tough for me to decide, but my advice for you guys in round 7 is for this to be the round where you guys take a quarterback. And the reason is it was just really tough for me to decide between Kyler Murray, Jordan Love, and Dak Prescott. These are all 3 guys that I think have legitimate top 3 upside at the position, and it just proved to me that this is a really clear sweet spot to taking a quarterback. You have Joe Burrow going in round 7 as well if he's someone that you're interested in, but there's just not a lot of players going around these guys that I'm actually super interested in. You've got guys like Xavier Worthy, DeAndre Hopkins, Jake Ferguson. There's nothing that's really super sexy there in terms of players that I think could legitimately move the needle for your roster. And on top of that, the value of taking a quarterback earlier in the draft is just, it's so low in comparing it to taking a guy that one of these 3 this late. Getting a guy in round 7 that I think has legitimately the same upside as a guy like Patrick Mahomes or Lamar Jackson. Like all 3 of these guys have shown that they can finish as top 3 quarterbacks, and I really do fully expect all 3 of them to have good seasons this year. So I'm super excited about all three of these guys, and I'm fairly confident round 7 is just going to end up being the round where I take my quarterback. And the other thing to highlight here is there's just a really significant drop off after these three. After these three go, you're looking at guys like Brock Purdy, Jared Goff, Tua, Caleb Williams. You could look down at Jaden Daniels, Trevor Lawrence. Plenty of streaming caliber guys that you could get by with, but nobody that I think has a legitimate shot to like elevate your roster. And I think all three of these guys can do that. So if you get to round 7, you don't have a quarterback, that's the round to do it. I personally would make an effort to wait till round 7 to do it, but if you are in round 7 and you haven't, it's critical here that you get one of these three, because if you miss out on that, I think you're really missing a huge tier break here. And the last round we'll highlight here is going to be round 8. And I think the best player to draft in round 8 is going to be David Njoku. He's the last tight end that I think could legitimately finish as a top 3 guy. I think there's a pretty clear like top 5 or 6 tight ends that you want to look at. You've obviously got Kelsey, Andrews, Laporta, McBride, and then Kincaid and Njoku are sort of the end of a tier for me in terms of those being the 6 tight ends that have a legitimate shot as finishing as a top 3 guy. And I'm not projecting Njoku to be a top 3 tight end. He actually is statted out as my tight end 6, so he's being drafted as the tight end 11. And we saw over the back half of last season that he can clearly be the tight end 1 even. He was the tight end 1 over the fantasy playoffs last season. Obviously, I know a lot of you guys are going to say that was with Joe Flacco, but he's just proven at this point that he's way too talented of a player for them to not just make him a focal point of the offense. He's being paid like he should be a high-end producer in this offense. I know Deshaun Watson is bad. I know it's not going to be a super high-octane offense, but David Njoku is a guy that can be featured really close to the line of scrimmage, which isn't something that can be said about guys like Amari Cooper or even Jerry Jeudy. David Njoku is probably going to be the most reliable producer in the passing game for this team, and I think the Browns might lean on the passing game even more than in past seasons. We've got Nick Chubb coming off of a serious injury. I wouldn't expect him to be able to hold up to a sustainable workload. On top of that, they added Jerry Jeudy, making it pretty clear here that with that wide receiver core, they want to try and air it out. They want to try and make their investment in Deshaun Watson look good. And if there's a lot of passing volume here, you could see Njoku see a 22% target share, maybe get a spike touchdown production season, and be a guy that could finish as a top 3 guy. And there's just nobody around him that makes me excited at the tight end position. You've got Brock Bowers being drafted ahead of him, Jake Ferguson being drafted ahead of him. He goes right ahead of guys like Dallas Goedert, TJ Hawkinson. There's a pretty clear teardrop here after Njoku, so I think drafting him here in round 8, if you don't have one, it's absolutely the round to take him. I do like the values of guys like Trey McBride and Dalton Kincaid earlier as well, but the value here just seems way too great for me to have highlighted one of those guys earlier. I did want to highlight one thing as well. If you happen to have a tight end already in round 8, Raheem Mostert's available there. I think that's way too good of a value. He's a guy that I think could easily be a top 10 guy, and if you don't want to take a tight end here in round 8, I think Mostert's probably the best pick outside of that. So that'll do it for the best draft pick in every round this season. I'll probably do a follow-up on this video as we get closer towards draft season, sort of see what things changed, maybe try and highlight some different players as well. But these are always super fun to do, see how I would sort of like highlight what I think like an optimal draft is. Obviously, I wouldn't necessarily draft all 8 of the guys I listed, because then I would end up with 4 running backs, 2 receivers, a tight end, and a quarterback, which isn't necessarily how I would necessarily build my roster. But I think these are guys that I'm really super excited about and guys that are really great values right now. So I would certainly be trying to get a couple of them in any drafts you guys are doing this season. Up next, I'll be going over the worst draft picks in every single round. So I'll go over players that I think are just absolutely not worth the value that you're being forced to take them at, and sort of highlight which guys I think are better alternatives and all that. So super fun making this video. If you guys haven't subscribed to the channel already, I'm going to be putting out content throughout the entire course of the off season and the regular season. There'll be several videos a week, getting up to 3 or 4 videos a week as we get into the regular season, and it's just going to be a lot of fun. I'm going to be here all off season and all regular season to help you guys win your leagues. So help me help you just by making sure you're subscribed, making sure you click the bell so you don't miss the future videos, and that way I can do everything I can to get you guys some championships this season. So on top of that, we're really close to that goal of 1,000 subscribers I have. We're at like 987 at the time of recording this, so really think we can hit that goal of 1,000. It's been a goal of mine for a long time, and I'm super excited to get there. So I appreciate all you guys. It's been a lot of fun, and I'll catch you next time. So peace. Thank you guys for watching. If you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe to the channel, like the video, check out these other videos here if you haven't. If you want more content, please feel free to follow me on Twitter at RealSteelFFB. I'll be more active on there as the season goes on. Thanks. Catch you later.